A billionaire just got slapped in first class. No warning, no shouting match, just the crack of a palm across a cheek, and the entire cabin froze. Brenda, the flight attendant in navy blue and flawless makeup, stood trembling. Her hand still hovered in the air, like it hadn't caught up with what she'd just done. Across from her, Dr. Isaiah Rowe didn't move. At 65, he looked like any other quiet, older gentleman in a tailored gray suit. But what Brenda didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, was that he controlled over $3.2 billion in aviation credit across 6 global airlines. And she had just slapped him. Tell us where you're watching from, because what happens next would leave 3 airlines scrambling and $980 million frozen within the hour. Isaiah reached slowly for the linen napkin on his tray table. He dabbed at the red mark blooming on his left cheek. No anger, no outrage, just silence. Brenda's voice cracked as she tried to save face. You refused to follow safety instructions. I told you to stow the laptop, and you disobeyed. Isaiah didn't respond. He didn't mention the turbulence still shaking the plane, the captain's clear order to stay seated, or the fact that standing to stow anything would have been dangerous. Instead, he looked up with calm, level eyes and asked softly, "Is that your final word, ma'am?" Across the aisle, a passenger murmured, "Did she just hit him?" Another gasped, "That's assault." Isaiah said nothing. He adjusted his cufflink, reached down to the sleek black Omega LTE on his wrist, and tapped a quiet sequence. 3 taps. Pause. 2 more. A silent trigger. The system behind that signal would notify the FAA's Ethics Division, Aerosphere Capital's Compliance Desk, and his private counsel, all in under 60 seconds. No threats, no raised voice, just one call. And the countdown had already begun. 2 hours earlier, Isaiah Rowe had walked through Toronto Pearson Airport like any other business traveler. No entourage, no flashy watch, no private jet. Just a soft leather briefcase in his hand and a direct boarding pass to Dallas. The check-in agent barely looked up when she handed him his printed boarding slip. 2A, first class. Isaiah offered a warm smile and thanked her softly. He'd taken this flight before, countless times in fact, but still preferred printed boarding passes over app check-ins. Old habit. At the gate, things shifted. As soon as Isaiah stepped toward the first-class lane, a woman behind the counter squinted at him. "Excuse me, sir. This lane is for priority boarding only." Isaiah didn't flinch. He handed over his ticket, voice even. "That's me. 2A." She blinked, looked again, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, okay then. Proceed." It wasn't new to him. The double takes, the suspicion. After 40 years of being the only black man in rooms lined with suits and polished shoes, you learn to read microaggressions the way others read weather forecasts. He boarded quietly, took his seat, placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him, not the overhead bin. He didn't want attention. The cabin was sleek, spacious, polished wood, cream leather, ambient lighting. A younger man across the aisle offered a polite nod. Brenda, the lead flight attendant, hadn't boarded yet. Isaiah pulled out his notepad, not his phone, not his iPad, just a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. He made a simple entry. Flight 612, YYZ to DFW. 2A. Cabin temp cool. Let's see what happens today. It wasn't bitterness. He'd learned long ago not to expect kindness. But some days, you still hope. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin had settled into its usual rhythm. Light chatter, the hum of engines, glasses clinking. Isaiah adjusted the small pillow behind his back and closed his eyes for a moment. Just a few hours to Dallas. A quiet flight, hopefully. But quiet didn't mean invisible. Brenda reappeared with her service tray. Champagne flutes lined up in perfect rows. She moved from seat to seat with a bright smile for everyone in first class, except him. She skipped over 2A without pause. No smile, no greeting, no eye contact. The older gentleman across the aisle raised an eyebrow, watching it happen. Isaiah said nothing. He simply uncapped his pen and made a mark in his notebook. Skipped initial beverage round. Noted. A few minutes later, she returned offering hot towels. Again, Isaiah watched as she delivered them seat by seat, warm, gently folded, offered with a pleasant tone. When it was finally his turn, she tossed his towel onto the armrest without a word. It slid slightly, landing half off the tray. He picked it up carefully, folded it himself, and placed it on his lap. The man across the aisle leaned in slightly. "Did she forget to speak to you?" Isaiah offered a small, practiced smile. She remembered enough to throw. The man chuckled awkwardly, then looked away. Isaiah wasn't angry. He'd seen worse. But there was something chilling in how routine it all felt. Like Brenda had decided from the moment he boarded that he didn't belong here. Like she'd seen his skin before she saw his seat number. Still, Isaiah kept quiet. He believed in documenting, not reacting. That's how systems fall, when patterns are proven. He glanced out the window at the clouds rolling beneath them, peaceful and unaware. Then he turned the page in his notebook and wrote 3 minor infractions: tone, omission, and dismissal. Eyes forward. He clicked his pen shut and waited. Something told him this flight was far from over. The cabin dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for meal service. A quiet hum filled the air, forks clinking, movie screens flickering, the occasional chime from a call button. Isaiah sat motionless in 2A, notebook on his tray table, pen resting beside it. Brenda returned, now pushing the beverage cart. Her smile reappeared. For some. The young man in 2B received a full rundown of drink options, complete with suggestions. When she reached Isaiah, her tone shifted. "What do you want?" "No, sir. No menu." Isaiah raised his eyes, calm as ever. "Do you happen to have ginger ale?" Brenda sighed dramatically. "We're short on that. This isn't a hotel bar, you know." Before he could respond, she pushed the cart forward. The man across the aisle, mid-50s, sharp suit, Texas accent, watched it all unfold. He leaned slightly toward Isaiah. "That was unnecessary," he said, voice low. "And I've seen it all flight." Isaiah offered a thin smile. "You're not wrong." Brenda returned moments later, this time with a forced smile and a can of club soda. She set it down with a plastic cup and walked away. No apology, no explanation. Isaiah didn't drink it. He simply opened his notebook and added a line. Tone, hostile. Language, condescending. Witnessed. He closed the book, not out of surrender, but out of precision. He had enough. Still, his voice stayed inside. He would not give Brenda the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, he turned toward the window and watched the clouds roll past. He remembered a saying his grandmother used to whisper back in Kingston. They never expect the quiet ones to be carrying thunder. He smiled at that. Across the aisle, the man reached over discreetly. You don't have to let that slide. Isaiah looked at him. I'm not. I just don't believe in striking back while still in the storm. He tapped his watch once, almost a reflex. It wasn't time yet, but soon. The turbulence came in waves, small at first, then stronger. The captain's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight attendants, be seated. Isaiah, already buckled in, reached forward to close his laptop. He moved slowly, careful to avoid shifting too much as the cabin trembled again. Brenda appeared out of nowhere, standing in the aisle beside him like a shadow. Sir, she barked, I told you to stow your laptop. That doesn't mean on your tray. Isaiah kept his voice even. With the seatbelt sign on and the plane rocking, reaching the overhead bin didn't seem wise. She folded her arms. You don't get to pick and choose which rules apply. This isn't your private jet. Several passengers glanced over. The tension thickened. Isaiah looked up. I'm following the captain's safety protocol. Brenda's tone sharpened. You're following your own version. I know exactly what this is. Isaiah paused. What is it exactly? She leaned in, voice low but cutting. Entitlement. I've seen it before. You think a fancy seat and a suit make you untouchable. The plane jolted again, harder this time. A flight attendant in the galley stumbled. Isaiah held the armrest, knuckles white. He didn't speak. Brenda, flushed with rage, took a step closer. You think you're above everyone. You're not. And then, it happened. Her hand flew out before even she realized it. The crack was sharp, unmistakable. Flesh to flesh. Isaiah's head turned slightly from the force. He blinked once. Silence fell over the cabin. A woman gasped near the bulkhead. Someone muttered, "Did she just—" Isaiah didn't raise his voice, didn't stand. He just reached for the cloth napkin again, dabbed the same cheek, and asked quietly, "Are you quite finished, ma'am?" Brenda stood rigid, breathing hard, her hand still hanging in the air like a threat. Isaiah didn't look angry. He looked certain. Isaiah didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand an apology. He simply lifted his wrist just slightly and tapped the side of his Omega LTE. 3 taps. A pause. 2 more. To most, it looked like a nervous gesture. But inside that watch was a secured transmitter, custom-built, silent, and known only to a handful of aviation executives. The system it triggered was called Watchdog. Built in partnership between Aerosphere Capital and a coalition of safety auditors, Watchdog wasn't public. It monitored breaches in passenger ethics, safety violations, and conduct failures, especially those that crossed into legal or discriminatory territory. And now, it was live. A blinking icon on Isaiah's watch confirmed activation. Signal sent, validating identifiers. FAA notified. Brenda hadn't noticed. She was still frozen in place, breath shaky, her confidence cracking. Across the aisle, the man in the sharp suit leaned forward, whispering, "Do you want me to call someone? File a report?" Isaiah shook his head gently. Already in motion. Behind them, a murmur spread. Word had reached row 3. One passenger whispered to another, "She hit him. I saw it." The cabin crew started to scramble, tension rising. Meanwhile, 38,000 feet below, in a secure office near Washington, D.C., a terminal blinked red. A staffer with FAA clearance saw the name Dr. Isaiah Rowe flagged and stood up straight. Within 2 minutes, notifications were sent to FAA's Ethics Response Division, the airline's Legal Risk Unit, and Aerosphere's Financial Compliance Command, triggering a precautionary freeze on $980 million in rolling credit contracts across 3 carriers. Still buckled in, Isaiah opened his notebook. He wrote only 3 words: action logged, escalating. And then he closed it, calm, composed, as if nothing had happened at all. But the clock had started ticking, and this flight was no longer flying business as usual. 12 minutes passed. The cabin was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after something breaks. No one dared to ask the obvious. They all felt it. Isaiah sat still in 2A, hands folded on his lap. Brenda hadn't returned. Instead, a younger flight attendant came through the aisle with tight eyes and trembling hands, offering nothing but strained smiles. Then the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to an unexpected technical issue, we've been instructed to divert. We'll be making an emergency landing at Denver International. Estimated arrival in 35 minutes. The words dropped like lead. Passengers looked up. One man pulled out his earbuds. A woman clutched her armrest. "Technical issue?" someone whispered. "What happened?" Isaiah didn't flinch. He didn't need to ask. Across the aisle, the man in the sharp suit leaned closer. "You had something to do with this?" Isaiah didn't smile, just answered softly. "I made a call." The system responded. Further up the aisle, Brenda appeared again. Her face was pale, her mouth set in a tight, uncertain line. She moved stiffly, checking seatbelts, avoiding eye contact, especially his. For the first time, she looked small. The murmurs began to grow. Row 1 had already heard what happened in first class. By row 4, passengers were connecting dots. "It's him," someone whispered. "She hit him. Now the plane's turning around." No one shouted, but the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to quiet accountability. Brenda stopped midway through the cabin. Her hands shook as she gripped the seat back. Her voice, once commanding, now cracked under the pressure. Isaiah glanced at the window. The ground below was changing. Rocky terrain. They were nearing Denver. He checked his watch. A small green light blinked once, then faded. Watchdog engagement. Confirmed. FAA on site. He exhaled slowly. The seatbelt light dinged. The plane began its descent. Somewhere behind them, a woman muttered, "She thought she slapped a nobody." Isaiah closed his eyes. Let her think that, for a few more minutes. The wheels touched down on Denver's runway with a jolt that made several passengers grip their armrests. The reverse thrusters roared. The plane slowed to a crawl, but no one stood up. The seatbelt sign remained on. The flight attendant said nothing. People glanced around, confused, uneasy. Then the captain's voice returned, tighter this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Local authorities will be boarding shortly to assist with an onboard matter. We appreciate your cooperation." The words, "local authorities," changed everything. The hum of casual discomfort turned to sharp awareness. Every eye turned toward first class, toward 2A. Isaiah didn't move. He simply reached for his notebook and opened it again. One line, "Descent complete. Awaiting consequence." The front cabin door opened with a mechanical hiss. 2 uniformed officers stepped on board, flanked by a woman in a black blazer with an FAA badge clipped to her collar. Behind them was a sharply dressed man with a tablet in hand. Raymond Ortiz, Chief Compliance Officer for Aerosphere Capital. Brenda stepped forward instinctively, thinking they were there for a routine check. "Welcome aboard," she said, trying to steady her voice. Ortiz didn't answer her. He turned to the FAA rep and nodded toward Isaiah's seat. Brenda followed the gaze and froze. It hit her right there in the aisle, with all eyes watching. She'd slapped the wrong man, not just a passenger, not just first class. The man who sat in 2A was Dr. Isaiah Rowe, the one person whose name was whispered in every closed-door airline finance meeting in North America. Before Brenda could retreat, one officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll need to speak with you, now." Passengers didn't clap. They didn't cheer. But you could feel the shift, the satisfaction of balance returning. Brenda's face went red as she followed the officers, her steps heavy, shoulders hunched. The same woman who barked orders now looked like a student called into the principal's office. Ortiz walked over to Isaiah. "Sir, we're here to escort you to a private briefing room. FAA has initiated a preliminary ethics inquiry. Aerosphere has frozen $980 million in linked contracts pending review." Isaiah stood slowly, buttoned his jacket. "Thank you, Raymond." He turned to the man across the aisle and offered a quiet nod. "Appreciate your voice." The man replied, "We all saw it. Some of us just needed a moment to catch up." As Isaiah stepped into the aisle, several passengers lowered their eyes, not out of shame, but out of respect. No flash, no thunder, just presence. The jet bridge felt colder than the plane, like the temperature dropped with the weight of what just happened. Outside, press hadn't arrived, yet. Inside the private terminal suite, a table was set with water, coffee, and legal folders. Ortiz began. "We're preparing the public statement, but first, FAA wants your formal account." Isaiah opened his notebook, flipped back a few pages, and handed it over. It's all there, time-stamped, no embellishments. The FAA official scanned the notes, visibly impressed. "Dr. Rowe, you didn't even raise your voice." Isaiah replied, eyes steady. "I didn't need to. Some systems don't respond to shouting. They respond to records." Outside, the plane remained parked. Inside, a new kind of turbulence was forming. One that wouldn't shake wings, but shake entire boardrooms. Less than 6 hours after Flight 612 touched down in Denver, the headlines started to shift. Breaking: FAA suspends international routes for Aero Blue after onboard assault. 980 miles in rolling credit frozen amid ethics breach investigation. Who is Isaiah Rowe? The quiet billionaire behind aviation's moral reckoning. Inside a conference room just outside the terminal, Isaiah sat calmly as screens lit up around him. FAA reps read reports aloud. Aerosphere's finance team streamed in via encrypted video. Airline executives scrambled behind closed doors. "As of this morning," one compliance officer said, "Aero Blue's flight conduct score has dropped from B+ to D+. That puts them below the minimum threshold for international credit backing." Translation: 7 international routes suspended, 3 partner banks pulling out, and 1 industry watching closely. Isaiah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded once and asked, "Has the board been notified?" "They have," Ortiz replied. "They're meeting within the hour, but respectfully, sir, they're nervous." They should be. At the same time, social media caught fire. A clip from the cabin, recorded by a passenger in row 3, had leaked. The moment Brenda raised her hand, the gasp, the stunned silence. People were sharing it with captions like, "He didn't yell, he didn't fight, but he brought an airline to its knees." In less than 24 hours, Isaiah's silence had become a statement. And now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed something like this on a flight? Tell us where you're watching from and if you've ever felt dismissed for how you look or where you sit. Back in the room, Ortiz tapped a folder in front of him. "Sir, media outlets want a quote. CNN, Bloomberg, Telltale's reached out too." Isaiah looked out the window. Planes still took off, blissfully unaware. "I'm not giving a quote yet," he said. "Let the numbers speak first." He stood, closed his notebook, and straightened his cuffs. "We're not here to punish people. We're here to rebuild standards." Outside, Aero Blue's stock dipped 14%. Inside, the man they once ignored had just rewritten the rules. The press conference wasn't flashy. No banners, no dramatic music. Just a room of executives, cameras, and a single podium in the middle. Isaiah walked up wearing a dark charcoal suit, a navy tie, and the same steady presence he had at 38,000 feet. There was no teleprompter, no PR rep whispering in his ear, only a thin stack of papers in his hand. He cleared his throat. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Isaiah Rowe, Chairman of Ethics Oversight at Aerosphere Capital. Today, I'm here not as a victim of misconduct, but as a witness to a larger failure, one we can no longer afford to ignore." Flashbulbs clicked. Some reporters leaned forward. "Over the last 48 hours, we've seen how a moment of silence can reveal volumes about an industry's cracks. But silence can also be a beginning." He held up the document. "Effective immediately, Aerosphere Capital will require all airline partners seeking credit, insurance, or infrastructure funding to sign and implement the Flight Justice Charter, a binding code of conduct focused on ethical treatment, transparency, and passenger dignity." A reporter raised a hand. "Is this a suggestion or a mandate?" Isaiah didn't blink. "It's the new threshold. No signature, no funding." The room went still. He continued. "Every cabin crew member, gate agent, and executive must undergo bias evaluation and dignity training. Not once, not during onboarding. Every year." The document outlined a minimum passenger ethics score per flight, a zero-tolerance clause on racial discrimination, and a new anonymous escalation platform. directly connected to Aerosphere's review board. "We're not looking to punish. We're looking to prevent." When he finished, there was no applause, just silence. The kind of silence that follows when the ground shifts and no one knows exactly what to say. Isaiah stepped down from the podium and walked off stage. The camera caught him from behind, walking alone, but carrying the weight of an industry finally being held accountable. Tomorrow, the signatures would begin, and for the first time, justice wouldn't wait for turbulence. Brenda Whitlow sat in a cold leather chair inside a glass-paneled conference room on the 14th floor of Aero Blue's corporate headquarters. The logo behind the ethics panel gleamed under the overhead lights. "Accountability begins with us." She had worn gray, not the navy blazer she used to wear with pride on flights, not the red lipstick she favored in first class. Just gray, neutral, forgettable. Across from her sat 3 members of the airline's Ethics and Conduct Board. To their left was a silent representative from the FAA Oversight Division, and beside them, unexpectedly, was a single empty chair, meant for Isaiah Rowe. It stayed empty. Brenda looked at it more than once, not out of fear, out of dread, because the absence said more than his presence ever could. The lead panelist, a woman in her early 60s, adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Whitlow, we've reviewed passenger statements, cabin footage, and reports from FAA and Aerosphere Capital. You are here to respond to a formal charge of misconduct, racial bias, and assault while in uniform." Brenda swallowed. "I lost my temper. You struck a seated passenger during turbulence. You belittled him in front of the cabin. You mocked him. It wasn't..." Brenda's voice cracked. "It wasn't personal. I thought he was just another one of those silent types who act superior. So, you slapped him." Brenda blinked rapidly. "I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," the panelist replied. "You thought it only mattered if he was someone." The room stayed quiet for a moment. No shouting, no outrage, just cold precision. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending a final review. Your name has been added to the Flight Justice Index, which disqualifies you from flying on any airline partnered with Aerosphere Capital. That includes 19 commercial carriers." Brenda stared ahead. She had spent 17 years in the sky. Now she couldn't board a gate with her own name. The panelist closed the folder in front of her. "You will be offered dignity training, should you wish to ever re-enter the industry. But as of now, this chapter is closed." Brenda stood up slowly, unsure what to say. She passed the empty chair again. Still empty. No revenge, no confrontation, just accountability, delivered with clinical precision, and somehow that cut deeper. Isaiah Rowe stepped into his apartment just after 8 p.m. The sun was setting beyond the skyline of Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the floor. He loosened his tie, hung up his jacket, and placed his watch on the small tray by the bookshelf. The silence here was different. Not the silence of tension like on the flight. Not the silence of consequence like at the hearing, just stillness. He walked over to a cabinet near the window and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was his old Air Force flight badge, tarnished slightly at the edges, but intact. He hadn't looked at it in years. Not since retiring from military intelligence. He picked it up, then quietly pinned it to a small corkboard above his desk. "Back where it belongs," he murmured. Then he sat down with his notebook. The last few pages were filled with timestamps, observations, names, and actions, all recorded with calm precision. But now, on a fresh page, he wrote just one sentence. "Power doesn't need volume. Just direction." He stared at those words for a long time, as if weighing them. Behind him, the news murmured on low volume from a TV in the kitchen. FAA confirms industry-wide compliance reviews after billionaire passenger Dr. Isaiah Rowe triggered a full-scale ethics alert mid-flight. Aero Blue shares down 19% with multiple routes suspended pending review. He didn't flinch. He'd done what needed to be done. Not for ego, not for press, but for the quiet man in row 27 on a different flight, the older woman who's overlooked at check-in, the kid who gets stared at for simply boarding a plane. He closed the notebook, locked it in the drawer. Then he walked toward the window. Outside, a plane soared through the sky, clean, sharp, silent. Isaiah watched it pass, then whispered more to himself than anyone. Let them fly better next time. He didn't need a press tour, didn't need applause, because justice, when done right, doesn't echo, it lands. Now that you've seen how quiet power can shake an entire system, have you ever been judged before someone knew your name, or watched someone mistreated simply because they looked like they didn't belong? Tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever stayed silent when you wished you had spoken up. Your stories matter, and sometimes all it takes is one voice to shift the flight path.